Johnson,
Here.
Lee,
Here.
Lilligren,
Here.
Lindstrom,
Here.
Muse,
Here.
Sterner,
Here.
Vento,
Here.
Wolf,
Here.
Zarin,
Present.
Carazelli.
I'm here. All right. The next item is the approval of the agenda, which was sent out in advance. And if I don't hear any objection, I assume it is approved. We have three really interesting information items. And I'm really looking forward to it. But first, the approval of the minutes that were sent out in advance. Is there a motion and a second to approve the minutes?
This is Councilmember Sterner. I motion approve the minutes.
Thank you, Phil. A second?
Vento seconds.
All right. I saw two blue boxes, so I'd say Councilmember Chambliss, thank you. Any discussion, corrections? All right, hearing none. Bridget, you may call the roll.
Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen,
Aye.
Chambliss,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Fredson,
Aye.
Gonzalez,
Aye.
Johnson,
Aye.
Lee,
Aye.
Lilligren,
Aye.
Lindstrom,
Aye.
Muse,
Aye.
Sterner,
Aye.
Vento,
Aye.
Wolf,
Aye.
Zarin,
Aye.
Carazelli.
Aye. The minutes are approved. So now we'll get on to the information items. And first up is our police work group update. Just as a reminder, we've at the next council meeting, Metro Transit's going to provide information item on their work supporting some of these themes that have come from both the Citizens League and from the work of the study group. And I think it's really important for us to consider that we're not waiting to the end of any big conclusion. We're kind of changing and evolving as we go. So this is real-time work. And I really want to thank Chair Reva Chambliss and those members who are really engaging in this. It's been so important, and we've been talking about it, and we've been actually making changes along the way. And when we think about the future of transit, developing the confidence in our system, it's and then plus all of our equity and goals for access. There's nothing more important than this concept of our police work group and our safety work group. So with that, I think Reva, I'm turning it over to you to grab the ball and introduce the subject.
Sure. I'm happy to introduce our police work group. We started and wrapped up phase one from the Citizens League, and we'll hear from them later on. We're going to talk about our top 2 or 3 priorities for our work group's police review and ask this committee what you think the work group should accomplish and your desired outcomes. Then we'll hear from the Citizens League and their final report. Reviewing the final report will be Michelle Fury with our public engagement management team. And then council members are going to be asked to provide their feedback and identify any topics that they'd like us to discuss as a group. So your top 2 or 3 priorities for the police review is the first open discussion that we'd like to have. And hopefully our council members have thought about what you think our top 3 or 2 or 3 priorities are for our police review and what you want the group to accomplish. So I'm opening up the floor right now to ask you those questions. Some of our group members have already reviewed these questions and answered, so feel free to jump in and provide the questions and your responses. The floor is open. And let me, if I don't see you on the screen, if you can use your raise hand icon or speak up. I'm going to call on folks. Okay, I see Peter Lindstrom, Councilmember Lindstrom. You can speak.
I can, and hopefully you can understand me through my mask. Just a few things which I don't, just to get the conversation starting, I think all of these are at your, are already likely on your plate. But just a few things, use of force, interaction with youth, the whole issue of oversight and governance, officer training, data collection, these sort of things would be top priorities for me.
Okay, great. We do have someone that's taking notes for all of your feedback, so we won't be incorporating that. Who else has feedback? Councilmember Molly Cummings. You're muted.
Ta-da! Thank you. I think one of the things in the study that came out that I have heard repeatedly from people that I know who have used transit on a regular basis or used to use it is the perception versus the reality of safety, and that the stations themselves, the platforms, but the on the various forms of transit, the loud music, the smoking, the trash, the lighting, the not wearing of masks, that rules are really not enforced, gives many the idea that, well, if we're not going to enforce these things, then these behaviors can escalate or other negative behaviors may be permissive, and that makes me feel unsafe. And I think that perception versus reality is extremely important. It may not be unsafe that someone is playing their music loud or smoking a cigarette or threw their potato chip wrapper on the ground. However, and the lighting and so forth. So I think all of those elements about the experience are really crucial to address.
Okay, thank you, Molly. How about Judy?
Thank you, Madam Chair, or however you're the chair of the task force, so this is great. Thank you for the opportunity to just pitch in. I just want to agree with everything that has been said by Councilmember Cummings and Lindstrom. I would also add one thing that I think has been on my mind for quite some time, even before this study. As we all know that we've had issues that we were going to be addressing, was a couple of things. I'm just going to renew my call that I'd like to look at again our reporting structure for the police up through the administrator and to the council. I'm interested in seeing if a direct report to the council could be an option to help keep lines of communication more open to us on the council, and kind of more mirror what I see often in local governments. Just a thought, and just again, not that that's my conclusion, but just wondering if there's a different reporting structure that we could implement that might help, especially while we're doing some significant change and trying to address some major issues. I think that that might be worthwhile looking at. And then the other thing that I think that I've asked for in the past is love everything that was in the Citizens League report, love the input from council members. And I think this is a big part of it, of course, is just making sure we're working with public safety professionals, whether they're active or former public safety professionals, who can share with us best practices as it relates to, community safety, and also, ensuring that our officers are getting what they need, not just physically, but mentally as well. So those things are important so that we have a force that's showing up every day with them, with their best selves, mentally, physically, and supported in every way they can to do their best job. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Other suggestions, feedback?
This is Councilmember Atlas Ingebretson. I have my hand up, but I'm not sure if you can see it, but.
Okay, go ahead.
So I agree with Councilmember Lindstrom's comments, so I want to ditto those. And I'd like to also add that we need to have an explicit conversation about how dominant cultures have hierarchy in providing and being heard when it comes to highlighting issues related to our policing. So examples of that is that issues that come from BIPOC communities when raised aren't addressed by systematically in the same fashion, because there are different ways that we communicate and we provide or value certain ways of communicating about concerns over others, or the method by which we collect impact biases, and we worked really hard in this process to limit that bias of approach, but it biases the type of information we share. Thirdly, that pressures for political reasons have assigned resources that benefit certain communities over others. And I think we need to talk about those pressures placed on us. I had several of my elected folks from my community talk about this as a challenge that they face as well, and are concerned about the racial aspects that come up with that, these types of issues, and how to deal with them. And the only way we can get at them is by talking about them explicitly. The last thing I would say is that I also think we need to talk about what are the standard reporting documents that we should always be able to see, and what is the cadence of those reports, and who are they provided to. Those reports should disaggregate information from the police based on age and should include minors, as well as race and gender.
Thank you. Looks like we have some very deep suggestions that I think we're going to have to take a lot of thought and discussion over. Any other comments or feedback? Sure, Councilmember Lindstrom.
Thanks. Thank you. Two quick things. One, when there is a use of force, it'd be great for the work group to look into what happens if I believe there's an internal review board of some kind. Is that a current best practice amongst transit police, or could there be improvements there? And then the other thing that would be good to look into is community partnerships, meaning I was really pleased to see in the Citizens League report that by far people really were supportive of additional eyes and ears on the buses and the trains, and community ambassador type program, or community service officers. And I believe, I know we have in the past had partnerships with Mad Dads and with the Hallie Q. Brown Center Community Ambassadors Program to do similar sorts of things, to be eyes and ears on our buses and trains. I'm not 100% positive that is still in existence. So that would be worth exploring those programs, whether they are still in existence and if they are working well. or if there might be other community programs that we could partner with.
Good suggestions, everyone. Other comments or ideas? Okay, so questions 1 and 2 are kind of related. Does everyone think that we've covered what we want the group to accomplish and our desired outcomes, or do you have some suggestions regarding what we should end up with once we complete our review in February?
You know, I just have a thought, and that's, and we've kind of alluded to this great feedback, but really want that community service officer, this whole idea of kind of having non-uniformed, presence, which we've now announced and initiating. But it's a work in process to make sure that it really is successful. So I would love to see the accomplishment is that we are kind of tracking and monitoring and helping guide and listen to how that is rolling out, and to ensure that it's really kind of what we have in our minds. And I think having talked to many different groups, sometimes there's people are seeing it in different ways. Let's make sure that's kind of guided by a vision that we all kind of agree on.
Councilmember Johnson.
Real briefly, and just, this is kind of a strange question, but is this work called the police review? And the only reason I ask is, I think it's, of course, reviewing police procedures and everything, that we're talking about, but in my world, I like to use the term public safety review, even though it's not a public safety department per se, but so much of what they end up doing goes beyond maybe policing because of the partnerships and community and things that they encounter. And so I don't know why, but I just have a different reaction to police review versus maybe that holistic public safety review as it relates to transit services. Again, a lot of times I think people read headlines or titles and it might send one message. Maybe when we're trying to, I'm not sure, but my sense is we're trying to be a little bit more broad than the review of our police. I don't know why. I just want to get that out there so it doesn't sit with me after the meeting. So take it for what it's worth. Thank you.
Very good point. And I think once we start getting into this discussion with the citizens review report, that might come out a little bit more in terms of the intent and the approach that we're taking. And I know that the approach that we're taking is quite broad, which includes other aspects of safety, like perceptions of the community and things like that. So, we can kind of work through that. Other comments or feedback? I see a hand up, Councilmember Lee.
Thanks, Councilmember Chambers. Yeah, I want to reiterate the earlier comments about governance and in particular, when we look at governance, some of the recommendations include doing more research into what our other peer agencies across the country are doing. And I think we should also look at internal policies and issues like police training and discipline, and how that it kind of fits into the larger the issues that go into governance. Thank you.
You're welcome. I see Councilmember Fredson. Do you have?
Thanks, Chair and Chair. Just wanted to, and I'm on the road today, so I'm just on audio, but I do serve on the work group, and I wanted to share with folks, kind of what I shared with the group last week, and it's that general, as far as the top line, it's our values are in conflict here, and on a personal level, my priorities would be addressing the perception and reality that transit and I think specifically our LRT lines are unsafe, and then, you know, at the same time, the perception reality that transit police and you know, are more of a threat than an ally. And you know, I hear and see anecdotal reports every, you know, often over the course of the last year, either directly or on Facebook or social media, from people I trust, and their experiences, and not good experiences. And I think that, you know, any one experience can shape people's attitudes and opinions of transit. And if they don't have a good experience, it might mean that they just don't ride again. And so I think we have to be mindful of that. So look, I think we have a problem. And what I said to the group last week was that, you know, I have concerns about law enforcement culture. I also have concerns about folks' experiences on transit, and so I think we need to you know, I guess if I had to choose today, if we like increase police or community service officer presence on trains in particular, LRT, I would be in support of that. The I'll just say, like, I've gone to the last two Gophers games, the home opener and the game this last weekend, and you know, it's under COVID. I think it's even a added element of safety, and you know, there's a fair amount of folks that aren't wearing masks, and there's not a lot of enforcement, and so I think that all of this, you know, whether it's under COVID or just day to day, like hopefully post COVID soon, is you know, we need to sort of have multiple sort of plans or approaches. And then, you know, I said this in my interview. I don't know how many of you got interviewed, but I was in advance of, you know, I think, you know, most of us were by the Citizens League, but I think what prompted the whole process here about a year ago was the murder of George Floyd and this letter we received from our employees. And I don't think that a lot of the concerns that our employees raised up have been answered, you know, bluntly or honestly, maybe by administration or staff, but not by the council. And so I think it's important for us to at least respond to that. And then the last thing is just addressing the presence of unsheltered on the transit system. And I've evolved on this issue. I mean, you all might recall that early on, I mean, I was very concerned about the reduction hours on the Green Line and what the plans were as far as our responsibility as it relates to making sure that unsheltered were, you know, adequately and responsibly taken care of it in the event that they were, you know, asked to step off a train. But you know, at this point, like I'm with Wes and Metro Transit in that, like, our transit system is not the most appropriate place for the unsheltered, and so we should not be the entity that is relied on to address that problem. And so the last thing I would say is one thing that came up in the meeting last week was the question of you know, look, this whole conversation is about safety, but the word comfort got brought up, and I just generally think that the people across the metro and our riders should feel comfortable on our trains and or buses and in our system. And I think that that's something we're going to have to grapple with as a work group and as a council. So and then finally, I would bring up, we had a conversation about audiences, and obviously riders and community and our employees are necessary audiences that we need to seek input from. But I also just, we have to be mindful of the fact that elected officials, especially at the state legislative level, and the general public are very important as it relates to both public support for investments in public transportation, but also we need, as of right now, both Democrats and Republicans at the state legislature to support those investments. And some of them, it's their worldview, they won't support it. But others, if they hear from enough constituents, they will. And I think we have to take steps to make sure that folks feel safe and comfortable on transit in order to justify those investments moving forward. So thanks.
Thanks, Council Member. I see a hand up by Sue, Council Member Vento, and then Council Member Atlas Ingebrigtsen. Are you on mute?
Sorry about that. Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to second and third and fourth what Chris just said, that Councilmember Fredson just said. I also serve on this work group, and I hadn't intended to say much tonight, but I want to follow up Councilmember Fredson's remarks by noting that for me, this is kind of an in my face sort of issue in that, and I know it's an in my face sort of issue for all of us, but it's in my face as an issue right now because of the purple line, also known as the rush line proposal in the East Metro area. And it's become pretty abundantly clear that a lot of what a lot of people know about transit is shaped by what they read in the paper and see on the local news. And there isn't a lot of good news coming out in terms of Met Transit, unfortunately. And it doesn't mean that we aren't doing our operators, our leaders, all of our staff that work in Met Transit. It doesn't mean that they aren't doing good things every day. It's just that what makes news, unfortunately, tends to be, for the most part, some pretty tough stuff. And the last week has certainly been that case with the sexual assault of the 15-year-old and the operator who was assaulted by a rider. And I can't in all good conscience say that's not that safety and security are not an issue for future riders. And so there's a lot of pushback. And I hope that I really hope that we keep in mind that we can't sustain this system if people, and this is so obvious, and I don't want to offend anybody for saying this, but we can't sustain this system if people lose confidence in it, regardless of where they come from and the experiences they're having. We've got to address all of them, but we've got to make sure that we're acting in a real forthright sort of way. I know I'm speaking to the choir, but I really think it's up to us, and we've got to grapple this. We got to wrestle it to the ground, and we got to do everything we can to help turn the tide, so that we begin to come out of this with our heads held high, knowing that we've done what we can do, what we need to do, and we're making strides in increasing confidence and hopefully in increasing ridership. Thanks. Oh, if I could add one more thing, Madam Chair, I just want to observe that it would be interesting to know why there isn't more interest in the vacant positions within Met Transit. And there's part of me that believes that while compensation might be part of it, I think perceptions that potential drivers and operators might have of their own safety on this system is also part of it. And I remember my father, when I was a kid, saying about our local school bus drivers, he said, Dad said, you couldn't pay me enough to do that job. And this was a school bus with young kids. And for the most part, you know, the behavior could be unruly, but it was nothing compared to what our operators and bus drivers are experiencing now. So I just hope we continue to realize that they're an important part of the solutions and resolutions that we're looking for. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen? Did you have your hand up?
I did. Thank you. I just a couple of thoughts that I think are important to, because I know we're going to have the conversation in the work group, and I was on vacation during the last meeting and unable to attend. So, but I also think it's important for us to say some things in public space so that, you know, we're paying attention to them and there's transparency. So one thing is I really want to, I hope in the committee that we are being very mindful of what brought it together and the scope of the conversation. There's a lot of things that I think we need to talk about, or the council should look into, related to Metro Transit and our busing, and from policy to funding. But I want to just make sure that it's clear, that we have a really clear scope of our conversation, and that this, you know, came out of the murder of George Floyd. And I just want to make sure we remember the impetus for the work that we're doing. Not that that's the only thing that we'll do going forward, but I want to make sure that we're clear about that scope so that we can be clear with the public about what we are doing and with our stakeholders, internal and external. The other thing that I just really wanted to share, as listening to my colleagues here, is the need for public agencies to support the public in building an informed perspective and understanding of what agencies do, and the difference, and helping them to be able to determine the difference between perception and reality, and being proactive in an effort around encouragement and engagement as it relates to our work. And the other piece I want to make sure was a little concerning for me to hear, so I just want to throw that out there, is using the word comfort. Often as a societal norm across all institutions and in public spaces, when we say comfort and we want people to feel comfortable, we prioritize certain populations' comfort over others, or even at the expense of safety for other populations. And often that falls around and along racial lines. We document significantly the disparities ourselves, and this whole conversation is rooted in that issue, that the comfort and safety for someone who is white is more important than the comfort and the safety for those who are not. And so I just, if I don't mean to say that is what was intended, but that is often what happens. And so I just want to make sure that we are clear about that being a well-documented, researched, and identified issue when we start using the word comfort, and that we are not naive to that in the work and conversations that we take on in the committee.
Thank you, Councilmember Atlas Ingebrigtsen. I think in our work group, it would do us good to discuss values and principles and come to an agreement on how we want to approach the police review and public safety in general. So I see
Chair.
Wendy Wolf has her hand up. And then
Chair, and I'm sorry, I'm driving. Yeah. I mean, Can I just
Okay,
respond to
go
that
ahead.
because I
Go
said it?
ahead. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I mean, the spirit of my comment is that I believe that all riders of public transportation should feel safe and comfortable. And I would note, like, the report that came back from the Citizens League actually like drew the distinction between both and lifted up race. And so, you know, I hear you loud and clear. I think we do. I think that it is what I brought up to the group was last week was I think all of our riders should feel comfortable, not just safe, but comfortable. And what is it going to take to get there? And I get that I think illustrates the premise of my comments, which was I feel like our values are potentially in conflict because whether it's unsheltered on transit or not, police presence on transit or not, safety and comfort or not, that's why the lens on this was, if I remember right, the various comments leading up to when I talked was, yeah, I'm feeling both overwhelmed and like it's yes, everything that the Citizens League brought back to us was not surprising, but it was overwhelming, and that's what we have to tackle.
Okay, thank you. I think we're going to continue to have discussions throughout this process about our values and our principles, and how we can have a holistic approach that is good for all stakeholders. So the next hand, the hand that I saw next was Councilmember Wolf, and then Councilmember Judy, and then I'm not sure, Susan, Councilmember Vento, if you had another comment, but we could take that afterwards because I still see your hand up. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you. I brought this up at the meeting, but I think it needs to be brought up again that the outreach and communication of the survey was missing input from the police department. And I think they need a different survey because the questions that are relevant to them are different. But we need to understand, does the police department feel like we care about them and support them in their work? Are there clear expectations for what they should be doing? Because I don't see that right now. I mean, we have fare enforcement that if you give somebody a ticket, they don't have to pay it because the county attorneys won't charge it. So you're going around asking people for their fare for no reason because there's no coherent thing to happen after that. I think we need to be aware also that we have a very diverse police department, but in the police world, there's a real shortage of people right now everywhere, and diverse candidates are highly sought after by other departments. And this is nothing new, but it's gotten to be more so recently. I know when my husband was first hired as a cop, he didn't even get out on the street before other departments were starting to recruit him and try to get him to come to them because he was a person of color. And if we don't value our people and give them clear expectations of what they're supposed to be doing instead of just this magic, you got to make it safe, we will lose people to other departments because they will have less stress and be treated better by people that they feel care about them. So it's very, very important that we talk with our police department about where are the gaps in the system, where are the things that don't work, like our fare enforcement, even things like the code of conduct on our system. Yeah, we have a list of rules, but if people don't do it, then what? you know, smoking and all these other things. If they go to somebody and ask them to stop smoking and they say no, do they end up on somebody's phone video that goes viral and get fired over a cigarette? I mean, we have to figure out clear expectations with our police department on how to make things safer, and that's a thing that's really missing right now.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. My understanding from the Citizens League was that one of the groups that they did interview was the police staff, but I can see also that that communication should continue beyond that, and we should also maybe hear some, you know, based on certain buckets of stakeholders, what were some of the key things and key themes that came out of their discussions for our council members to hear. Let's move on. Councilmember Johnson, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And just again, briefly, I really appreciate all of the council comments that have been made. I too am concerned about a lot of things, right? I guess what my point was simply that I appreciate this task force coming together. I wish I could have been on it. I've been talking public safety for transit since I was new to the council. It didn't happen. I can understand that not everybody can be on every task force, but given the scope, the passion, the high profile nature of this topic, the importance coming out of George Floyd's murder, all of that, and moving forward, workforce, everything that's been mentioned, worker shortage, making sure our police, again, are cared for in the way they need to be cared for with the resources they need. You know, it's like teachers. Everybody wants the kids to learn better. Do teachers have all the resources they need? They're another group that is overtaxed and overworked, trying to, you know, perform magic every day in a classroom. And I think there's a lot of similarities right now for our police and public safety officials. So I really, it's too late now, but I really think that because of the passion around this and because of the various interests we all represent throughout the region on this, when it does come back to the council, I think you know, half of us are not going to be, you know, kind of part of this process. And I wish this would have been more of a council of the whole process in general. We asked 2 questions tonight and look at how much passion and concern and all good intentions are coming out of this. So again, great group on the task force, but I think this would have been one that the whole group should have tackled for many reasons. Not a criticism, just kind of hindsight.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. We will be talking about the schedule and we will have several council committee of the whole meetings for council members to chime in on. And at any time, once we are giving our updates, you'll be given that opportunity to respond as well. Councilmember Sterner?
Yes, thank you. And I won't rehash what other comments have went, but I think Council Member Fredson, I think, has a lot of the comments that I'm thinking of. I was just going to add that maybe we also should get input from some drivers. I've had some conversation with drivers that have been assaulted that are employees on there to have some input on what they feel the safety is, because they're with our customers every day when their operators are giving you know, service both of the light rail and our buses. So I think that would be a good part. And I'm also, we talked about the unsheltered people. I'm also wondering about like what the actions our HAT team takes, like when they're unsheltered, just to make sure we've got a, you know, structure in place on that to go through. I know we had a report early on from the HAT team, but I think that's a big part of our with our public safety is, you know, working with our unsheltered people, making sure that they're safe and they have shelter at night that other than, you know, the vehicle they're in when possible. And then the third thing is sometimes you know, we talk about perception versus actual, but I'll go out on people of all different colors and ages that there is actual things that could have the people talk and events that have happened, et cetera. So I know it's more than just being comfortable and being safe. It's there's things that are happening that are making our customers not taking the devices and that. So I just want to make sure it's more than just perception. All right, thank you. I'm complete.
Thank you, Councilmember Sterner. It looks like we've heard from most of our council members that are attending this meeting. Obviously, this is a very passionate subject. There is a lot of information to go through and a lot of desired outcomes because we really care about our communities and our police department and making sure that we provide the best services for everyone and all of our stakeholders. So we will have many more chances to have discussions like this. We really appreciate all of the feedback, which will be captured and taken away so that we can address them. Let's move on to the next slide. So next up, we're going to be having a brief presentation on the Citizens League final report. And then after that report is given, if there's an additional responses by council members in terms of our specific work group plan, you'll have an opportunity to comment today and also into our further discussions. Next slide. And is it Michelle that is going to be presenting?
Yes, Madam Chair and council members, thank you for the opportunity. You've had quite a bit of conversation already today, and it's clear that you spent some time with the report. So I think we probably won't spend a lot of time on the next several slides, but we did just want to have a moment to note the receipt of the report, the discussion that the work group had on the report last week, and give you an opportunity to respond more directly to any of the feedback you heard as you were reviewing the materials. I'm just going to go through a high-level summary of some of the higher-level themes and recommendations in the report, and then obviously we'll open it up again for some conversation around the specifics that came back from the community engagement. As you see here, there were a handful of themes that were identified in the report. I'm just going to make some brief comments about the context for these buckets of findings. The first one is the perception versus reality of safety, and you've already spoken about this quite a bit today. Primarily that safety is a key consideration that the Citizens League engagement did have a lot of discussion about with our community members, but comfort was also a piece of that, and you have as well spoken about this today, and that there were a number of people who it was clear that when they were speaking about safety, they were actually speaking about comfort on our transit system, and that they may have had an experience where they weren't threatened or directly made to feel unsafe per se, but they were definitely uncomfortable either with the behavior of the folks on the vehicle with them or other experiences they had on the system. The second theme is that passenger behavior impacts safety. And as we've heard today, we know that we've heard from a number of our customers and our employees that there are conditions on our system that really make it feel like it's not a safe place. And it also feels like all of the things that our communities are dealing with are being illustrated on our transit system. The third theme is that more riders do lead to a feeling of safety, and that particularly during a time of pandemic, which the report also addresses. There were fewer commuters, there were fewer regular riders on the transit system, and it felt even more stark that when someone experienced something, that it was more clearly affecting them because there just are fewer people on our system. And there's a lot of discussion and a lot of feedback in the report about how having a more bustling and a busier system will mitigate some of those experiences. The fourth bucket is that safety is more than enforcement. And this also gets back to some of the cleanliness and upkeep issues and the conditions related to broken things or things not working, that those also feel or contribute to a feeling of being unsafe. And then the final theme is that the presence of an authority figure leads to a greater sense of safety. And this engagement certainly happened before we had the discussion of additional officers and community service officers on our system. And a lot of the suggestions that we heard from community and from our employees were that it's important to have someone who can solve problems, who projects the mindset to the folks that they're around, that they are there to solve problems, that they are there to be called upon for help. And that may mean someone who's, either offering some more of a security presence or a community service officer presence, but certainly that would be something we could do additional engagement on to be more specific around. The other themes that came up in this context too, though, were that a lot of people, particularly people of color, did say during this part of the process that it's better to have someone that they can turn to help take a problem away, or to deal with harassment, other threats of safety, but that sometimes having a police presence isn't necessarily better. So they're sort of weighing the options, and they're glad to have someone who can help, but it's still a difficult situation either way. And the things that people carry with them too, in witnessing and experiencing either crime or some sort of being near some sort of act of violence on transit is very difficult to forget and to move on from. Next slide, please, Greg. So there were 3 primary recommendations embedded in the report, and the first one you've referenced here already is to conduct a review of other cities' transit systems to understand best practices and how they might be addressing some of these conditions. And that work is already underway, and you'll hear something about that next week at the council meeting, as Chair Zelle mentioned earlier today. The second one is to continue community engagement efforts, largely through some of the partnerships that were forged in this process. And that is absolutely something we're going to continue to do. And we've heard from you today too as well that is a value of yours, not only to continue community engagement efforts, but to continue engaging our employees, and particularly the personnel in our police department. And that will be a critical piece of this moving forward, both in the working group work and beyond, as recommendations begin to be implemented. The third thing is that Metro Transit can invest in and implement suggested strategies that might lead to an increased sense of safety among riders. All the things that you've been hearing about on our system, and there are a handful. There's a list, and this was included in the summary document, and is certainly available for you to review and for the work group to review. But it's quite a list of ideas that members of the public had for us to consider as we move forward in this process. And they're really practical things. And again, as you heard earlier, a number of them are already underway, and it would be really good for you to hear an update about all of that work at the council meeting next week. Greg, you can forward to the next slide. This is the list. It's kind of small type. I'm not going to read them all, but you get the idea that there are a number of things that people said would actually help them feel safer on the transit system. And a lot of them are about environmental considerations, as we've talked about before, the conditions of the system, etc. So it's, and certainly toward the bottom, we see some of the more tangible things related to police and other personnel on the system, and just having some transparency around how our personnel are trained and what they're actually equipped to do when they're out helping solve problems on the system. So these again are all things that you've all said today, and it's good that there's some resonance between what you're seeing and what folks have said in our engagement as we move forward. I think these are going to continue to be topics that people will ask us about, and will certainly be a part of the overall discussion. That's all I have to present. You can move to the next slide. And that's really intended to set up the discussion. I'm going to turn it back over to Chair Chambliss, but I just wanted to let you know too that if there's any interest in further discussion or delving into any of these things, we're here to help make sure that the work that the Citizens League did is continued through this process, and that those voices are continued to be amplified in this process. So we're here to make sure that that happens. So any feedback you have is welcome, and I look forward to supporting the work as we move forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that summary, Michelle. Much appreciated. If you can go back to slide number 8 before we start asking council members to respond, I would like to say that I really appreciate all of the work that the Citizens League put together. We got a lot of great ideas and feedback, concerns that our community members and stakeholders have that was captured in the first phase of this review. But there's a bullet on here that says provide customer service, anti-racism, and de-escalation training to drivers and conductors. Perhaps we need to expand that training, or at least have note that our police officers also currently receive customer service, anti-racism, and de-escalation training. That has already been told to the council members that they receive that, but just so that that's really clear. And then also there is the second to the bottom bullet talking about cultural norms that prevent some of the gender and disability-based harassment. We might want to add youth and race to that bullet as well. Comments from council members? Responses, reflections on what the community had to say in the summary. Councilmember Cummings?
Thank you, Chair Chambliss. This is great, and I think that it's important to remember that this is an ongoing process, and that it takes continuous and continued input from all of the stakeholders that we've spoken about, including the operators, including the police force, including the public, including those who are using or not using transit, why or why not, and that this is not going to happen overnight. And to even know how to move forward, we need to know where we are. And so I think this is a really excellent way of helping us understand our starting point, figuring out what our goals are, and how we're going to move toward them. Again, continuing, life is evolving, and life, as we hopefully are moving out of COVID, is changing things as well. So I think that work it's critical that we continue to ask these questions, engage everyone, get all of the ideas. I really hope that this will continue as an ongoing conversation among all council members at the COW or wherever we're going to have it, in addition to the work group and so forth. The work is terrific. I appreciate how much has gone into this. And again, just to reiterate that clearly there's tremendous passion by everybody to address these challenges and figure out how we're going to move forward. It's not going to be easy. We don't have a ton of money to put toward these ideas, but I think that with creativity and ideas and thinking outside of the box, how can we use the resources that we do have available to address the issues that are front and center and our primary concerns is really, really important. But I thank you all for the work that is being done, and I hope that we will continue aggressively addressing all of these issues.
Thank you, Council Member. Judy, do you have your hand up, or was that from before?
Well, I did not take it down, but Madam Chair, can I just ask one quick question on these points?
Sure, Council Member.
As I am printing out the many page report right now here at home, can't wait to read the whole thing. But so community ideas, does that include the people from police or public safety in general? Their ideas, I would assume, are woven into this as well. It would be the whole body of input, right, that was received from the Citizens League during their engagement. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yes, Michelle, do you want to speak to that?
Absolutely, Madam Chair, Councilmember Johnson. This slide here is highlighting just the community ideas, but the full report has a full download of all the information we received from the employees during this process. It's there.
And Madam Chair, just for follow-up, so this is great, right? Community is what we're all about, our customers, people that want to take transit, used to take transit, whatever. But yeah, I'll read the full report because this is important, but again, it's a part of it, right? Because there's a lot of stakeholders in this, and it'll be interesting to read the full report to see, you know, what the other points of view are as well, and where the intersections can be found. And so I just appreciate that. I might have appreciated some of those points in this quick presentation, but I'll read the whole report and get them there.
Michelle, is it possible for us to do that review and then find maybe get an overview of where there are intersections and where we have shared values and principles, if not captured with the Citizens League work, something that we can present to council member at a future date?
Yes, that's it's very simple to just cross-reference the pieces that we've heard from employees. They're very similar in terms of the problems identified and the things that they feel are priorities for the council to address.
Great, thank you. Council member Atlas Ingebrigtsen.
I had to unmute and lower my hand. Both of those things complicate stuff. I just was wondering, it would be, I appreciate that Council Member Johnson is printing out her report. I read it electronically, but I would love to have this is super tactical, printed version. Is there a possibility we can get those sent to us, or at least council members who would like one?
Michelle?
Sure, just let me know and I'll get it out to you.
Thank you. Any other question? Any other responses from the report? If not, I think that completes the presentation.
Just the chair, I just was requesting if we could just send it out to everybody. That's either all the council members, that'd be helpful for that. So then everyone has a chance to see it.
I see somebody shaking their head no, maybe wanting to save paper. Why don't you go ahead and put your request in if you want the full report? I know it's a number of pages.
Is it already electronically too, or the report?
Yes.
Okay, so we
Yeah,
have it electronically.
Yeah,
Okay.
we can resend that out if needed.
And
All right,
it's
thank you, that's helpful.
and if you go to the agenda, there's a link on the agenda.
All right, perfect.
Yeah.
All right, thank you, Chair.
And those inkjet printers, they get a little tired with those multi pages. Yes, I agree. Thank you so much, Councilmember Chambliss, and everyone for such a robust conversation. I mean, this is really meaty, and clearly we're going to revisit this issue many times, and appreciate also the service on the which I think broadly defined public safety police work study. It's really something we're going to be grappling with this year, especially. We have really two presentations, and I'm glad we've left time for them. But I know it's shifting gears, both on housing, residential development, really important report, and then also we're going to hear about how kind of our affordable housing development trends and regional housing policy. But to start in first, Joel Nyos, residential development in 2020. Pretty interesting issues that this region is facing. So with no further ado, Joel, take it away.
All right, well, thank you, Chair Zelli, council members. Hello, my name is Joel Nyas. I'm in the research unit in the community development department here at the Metropolitan Council. So for tonight's presentation, we're just going to go over our findings from our annual residential building permit survey for 2020. Before we start, I'd like to quickly thank those in the research, Kristen Rivaturas and Matt Schroeder, as well as Jim Dudley and Elias Anthan in the Information Services Department for the help on this project. And I'd especially like to thank all of the local communities and county staff, their participation in getting us data, because for the first time since I've been here, I got here in 1997, we had a 100% response rate for the annual residential building permit survey. So it's really a great example of collaboration between the Metropolitan Council and local community staff. We've collected this information from local governments annually since 1970. And the attributes we gather from this are the housing type, number of units, permit type, such as new construction or demolition, the location, if it's age restricted, and also the permit value. Slide, please, Greg. So again, the purpose of today's presentation is just to share the results of the 2020 annual building permit survey, looking at new housing, the number and types of locations of new housing. We'll look at how the events of 2020 affected housing production and what early residential construction activity in 2021 looks like. Next slide, please, Greg. So 2020 was a highly residential permitted year, not as much as 2019, which was the highest level of residential permitting activity since 2004, but fairly close. So we know there are other permitting components that affect the housing stock by adding or subtracting units. There are demolitions that subtract housing units. There are conversions of warehouse or commercial units that change into multi units. There are remodeling projects that add or subtract units. So to get to the overall supply, we really want to focus on net housing change, taking into account all the additions and subtractions. So in getting to the net change of residential units, here are some numbers from 2010 to 2020. Slide, please, Greg. We start with the largest number of permits added, which is new units, shown in the blue there. Slide, please, Greg. We add on the units that were conversions into residential units. Slide, please. And then a small number of other additions, such as units moved into a community. And then we subtract from that demolitions. Slide, please. Oh, I'm a little bit behind. And a small number of other losses down there on the blue and the orange. After we add up the additions and subtractions, we end up with the net change. So looking at the overall net change, one back, please. There you go. After we add up the additions and subtractions, we end up with the net change. So looking at the overall net change rather than just the new units can be important, especially in areas where there can be a lot of teardowns and rebuilds, so as not to overstate how many units are being produced. And we see here that we're a little under 1,000 away from last year's 2019's historic number. Overall, in 2020, the region added a little over 19,000 residential units. Slide, please. And with the net change in residential units, we didn't track all permit types prior to 2000, but looking at 2000 and beyond, slide please. It shows kind of the same theme that we aren't at the pre-recession peak in units added. The years with over 20,000 units permitted are in blue. Slide please. We can see from 2000 to 2009, the region averaged 14,600 permitted units every year. From 2010 to 2020, the number dropped to 12,900. But the region is getting closer to the 2000-2009 numbers, mostly fueled by multifamily units being permitted at a much larger rate. Slide, please. As a region, we have increased our housing supply as estimated by the Census Bureau. Slide, please. This chart shows housing unit growth from the 2020 census. The housing unit change for the Twin Cities region, which is in green, and the other 11 national peer regions identified by greater MSP in gray. So in the Twin Cities, it's kind of in the middle, but slightly towards the end for housing unit growth compared to our peer regions. We have increased our housing unit supply again, as estimated by the 2020 census, by about 9% since 2010, which is only ahead of Boston, San Francisco, Chicago, and Pittsburgh. This issue has been brought up and presented to the council in the past, so it is a known continuing issue. Slide, please. So the next question is, are we keeping up with population change, which is the blue dot, and we are not. Our 9% increase in housing units is not keeping pace with the 10.7% increase in population. Slide, please. So a takeaway of this chart is that we are not alone in keeping up with population growth. It's not just our issue, but most of the other regions as well. We're the Twin Cities fourth highest shortfall given population growth compared to our peer regions. Slide, please. A variety of housing types are being permitted. Slide, please. According to our annual building permit survey, multifamily units make up the bulk of the amount of housing units added, and they have stayed over 50% of the permitted units since 2011. There were around 12,500 multifamily units permitted in 2020, which was lower than the 13,250 that were permitted in 2019, but still more than 2018, which had over 10,000 units. That was previous the highest number since 1987. Slide, please. The number of townhomes permitted remain low, but fairly consistent in numbers over time, and they make up about a sixth of all new permitted units since 2010. Slide, please. And we permitted around 5,700 single-family detached units in 2020, which was the largest number recorded since 2005. We tracked 2 additional housing types that are not in this slide because of their annual numbers they're really low. They are duplex, triplex, and quads, and accessory dwelling units. The number of duplex, triplex, and quads gained in 2020. We gained 43 units. We also had 34 accessory dwelling units permitted in 2020, which was the highest number on record. We've seen a loss of over 800 duplex, triplex, and quads over the last 10 years. We'll see if that changes with new changes in zoning in cities like Minneapolis. But currently, it's only a footnote to the story in this building. Some accessory dwelling units, they were once considered an opportunity to add affordable units with small footprints on existing parcels. But we're seeing fewer than 40 permitted a year since we've been tracking it in 2014. Now, slide, please. As we talked about earlier, most of the units permitted between 2010 and 2020 have been multifamily units, but not all of them are targeted to the general population. This chart shows that 12% of multifamily units permitted were age restricted in 2020. One thing we've been seeing in the permit data the last few years is the percentage of new age restricted housing. It's decreasing, with age restricted units making up 26% of all multifamily housing. In 2017, 35% in 2018, and then 22% in 2019, to just 12% now in 2020. All right, slide, please. Looking at the region as a whole with a map, it shows the broader pattern of where units are being permitted between 2010 and 2020. So looking at cities with the largest net gain from 2010 to 2020, we see that Minneapolis has by far the largest net change since 2010. Minneapolis had more permitted units in 2019 than any other year. This was also the case in 2018. What's interesting about this list is just the geographic spread, but also within these total, there are a mix of housing types. Minneapolis's big total is largely driven by multifamily, but we also see multifamily in some communities like Eagan, Bloomington, and Minnetonka. Single-family detached units was the predominant housing type in Lakeville and Woodbury, while Maple Grove had a mixture of both. All of these details are available in our data up on our website. Slide, please. Due to the civil unrest last summer, there were several residential properties damaged during this time. Unfortunately, these specific properties are not captured in our annual building permit survey. We do collect demolition data and larger remodeling projects, but there isn't an explanation of why they were done. Most of the damage inflicted during the riots was in the non-residential or mixed-use sector, but there were losses in residential properties as well. According to the local media reports, over 50 residential properties were damaged. The most notable residential property affected was Midtown Corner in Minneapolis. Midtown Corner was a $30 million 6-story mixed income housing development that was still being built and was burned to the ground during the riots. It was a complete loss. It is currently being rebuilt, and I think the next presenters will go over this project in more detail. Slide, please. The COVID-19 pandemic has obviously affected many lives, but it has affected the residential sector as well. Slide, please, Greg. According to the Census Bureau's building permit survey, national residential construction activity paused in March of 2020, then came back strongly in August. The Twin Cities region had a similar 2020 timeline by having a construction lull in April and then making a comeback in August as well. Slide, please. Related to construction activity, some of the areas COVID-19 has affected new constructions were in the lumber prices because of mill closures, transportation issues, and overall need for lumber. Softwood products went soaring up to 300% higher than before the pandemic. Other construction materials like concrete and drywall, manufacturing plants had to shut down for extended periods of time, creating a backlog of need. The shortage of materials, such as like metal for appliances, higher metal costs, and being manufactured in other countries with travel restrictions has affected their availability and cost. Shipping, also involving other countries with travel restrictions, and also skilled construction laborers. For years, there's been a shortage of skilled laborers, but the pandemic has made it worse. According to the National Association of Home Builders, normally there were 298,000 unfilled construction jobs last year. All of these items and more have made it around $36,000 more expensive to build a home nationally, according to the National Association of Home Builders. Next slide, please. So what does the first part of 2021 look like? Looking at the 2021 data so far. For apartments, it looks like it's going to be a big year. Slide, please. According to the latest Dodge data report for the second quarter of 2021, the total value for the first 6 months of 2021 has already matched the same level as all of 2020. This isn't on the slide, but for single family units, mortgage rates are still near historic lows, slightly above currently. And many industry experts expect the rate to remain low throughout the year. But the supply of lots is also extremely low, which will increase the house prices more rapidly. And we talked about earlier, the construction costs will remain high. Looking at the Census Bureau's building permit survey comparing July of 2020 against July of 2021, it also shows a big year for single family detached units, which has increased over 2,000 units. It's also worth noting that the ratio of single family units and multifamily units is creeping toward a 50-50 split. So this is something to keep an eye on. Other slide, please. So some quick takeaways from this presentation. The demand for housing remains strong, fueled by years of production shortfall and steady population growth in the Twin Cities. Multifamily permitted units dominated the unit gains this year and have dominated the post-recession years. The number of age restricted units decreased again, and their share of the multifamily housing type has been decreasing in recent years. New single-family detached units were permitted at the highest level since 2005, and other housing types have remained relatively low in numbers. The region has averaged almost 13,000 units gained since 2010. Minneapolis was the biggest gainer in units by far, just as in previous years. COVID-19 has affected the housing market. There was a pause in residential construction in the spring of 2020, but came back strong in the late summer, early fall. The region added over 19,000 new residential units in 2020, which was a similar number as in the past few years. According to the recent permitting activity, 2021 should be a banner year for permitted single-family and multifamily units. Please, Greg. And all this data can be found on our website, Metro Council /research, metrocouncil.org/research, and then the spatial data can be found also in the Minnesota Geospatial Commons. Next slide, please. And here's my email address if you have any questions. And thank you for that brief presentation.
Thanks, Joel. Any questions for Joel at this point? Molly.
Thank you, Chair. Joel, I'm wondering, one of my cities talked about the increase in the price of lumber and the various reasons that it spiked as high as it did. But one of the reasons that I don't hear talked about too much is the wildfires, especially out on the West Coast, that have just decimated forests and trees that we might have had cut down to provide lumber. So I guess my question to you, looking in your crystal ball, if in fact that is a significant factor or may become a significant factor, it takes a tree. A tree isn't a shipping thing where once we straighten out the shipping and we can have better channels to receive our materials, it's hundreds of years before the trees are at a point where they can be used. And we keep hearing, or I keep reading, that wildfires will be a continuing issue with climate change that may really exacerbate the issue of forestation and the burning down of so many trees in this country. So do you have a comment on how that might also impact the availability of lumber for building and construction?
Chair Zelli, Councilmember Cummings. Yeah, I really don't, but I think I've read the same articles as you. It's not like a tree can be grown. It's not like a product that can be made quickly. So it takes years for obviously to get to the height that they can be harvested. But outside of that, I really don't have anything else. I can look into it more though and give you back some feedback.
I'm just, if I may, I'm just curious if you have heard that as any significant reason for in the lumber shortage and the lumber price spiking, or if that was sort of an anomaly that has come up recently, at least to me.
Yeah, Chair Zelli, Councilmember Cummings. I have not read that before, but I will look into it more.
I suspect, Molly, it might be a confluence of different factors, include trade policy, demand, and various fluctuations of supply. But I don't know. Good questions. Say, Joel, you know, when you look at the slide that shows the dip during the recession, the Great Recession, you know, 2009, 2010, I've always heard we just haven't caught up. And we really need, we're kind of short of housing units in part because we still have this kind of demand. Is that what you're seeing in some of these trends, and that will the rate of the stellar year 2021, is that are we going to be are those is demand going to be met, or are we always kind of behind at this pace?
Chair Zelle, yes. As you can see, you can tell it, but the number of units has increased in the last few years, not quite the pre-recession years, but yes, we are catching up. It'll be interesting to see what 2021 brings, especially in the single-family detached housing. But yeah, we are catching up, but we are still behind.
Other questions for Joel? Go ahead, Phil.
Thank you very much, Chair. I just, you brought up some of the alternatives, but I'm kind of wondering about like the tiny homes. Have you seen any pressure on tiny homes and maybe using alternatives to wood for like the shipping crates, for example, and other things? And then I'm also wondering if you're starting seeing some homes where they're building less, but then maybe homes are turned into renting by the room, you know, for affordable housing. And then I guess my third thing is mobile homes. You didn't mention mobile homes or motor homes on lots. Is I know they're not considered to be housing, they're considered vehicles, but I'm just wondering if you track that at all.
Chair Zelle, Councilmember Turner. Yes, in our survey, we don't specify if it's a tiny home or not. I know that's usually up to the city if they allow those or not. So I really wouldn't have a comment on that. I forget what your second question was again.
Oh, just also about motor homes and mobile homes, if any of that's tracked at all.
Yep, that is another survey that we do. It's the Manufactured Housing Parks Survey. So we survey all of the parks in the region to see how many lots they have, how many manufactured homes they have, how many are rental units. So that is something we track. Won't include it in the building permit survey, so it's kind of its own survey on its own. If there is a manufactured home on a rural lot, we would capture that though in the survey, but those are far and few between. But yeah, the Manufactured Housing Park Survey is the survey that we capture that data.
Okay, yeah, the third thing was just seeing, I forgot one of my areas, but one is like rooms, if you're seeing houses and broken up into like a separate, sold by the room. So like maybe you see a single family home going to be like a 4-bedroom type of a unit. And also if you're seeing more like with a lot of the empty lots, and it seems that mostly in the North Minneapolis area where there's a lot of housing with empty lots, if you're seeing people starting to look at those for more permitting than that.
Yes, Councilmember Sterner. Again, we don't capture that in the survey data, but I have seen that in the data research. One of the things we've been noticing is a lot of multifamily units around like colleges are now, they're not dorms, but they're geared specifically towards students where they rent by the room. Have a room with maybe 2 beds, so it's kind of like a dorm, but it's like an apartment. Those were becoming popular probably 3-4 years ago. The last few years, we really haven't had any. But as far as the single family detached, renting out by the room, I really haven't seen much of that.
All right, thank you very much. Great presentation.
Chair, may I? Thank you. I saw your head, nod your head.
Sorry, I was muted. I was saying, Riva, please.
That's quite all right. I did see an article recently, and I'm not sure if it might have been an article that came into my Met Council email, that manufactured homes and trailer parks are having a reduction in home inventory over time. So I think that would be something interesting for the Met Council to review and look at.
Yes, Councilmember Chambliss. To go over that question, are you saying that the number of manufactured housing units in the parks are declining?
Yes.
Like the number? Okay.
Now, I could be, maybe that article was wrong, but I'm just kind of curious about that as well.
Yeah, we'll be going our manufactured housing park survey results soon here. We send that survey out in April and try and gather the information. The last few years, the response rate is low due to COVID-related issues, I'm guessing. But yeah, we'll go over those results probably in the next month or so.
Okay, thanks.
All right, folks, I think we want to leave time to hear this next presentation because it's very much related, looking at our housing policy and then a report on affordable housing development trends. And with us is Kristen Reba Torres and Tara Beard. Everybody may know Kristen is a senior researcher. Tara Beard is our manager of Livable Communities program. And as I understand, when you think about affordable housing, some of it's subsidized, some of it isn't. So we're going to get the whole picture. And welcome both of Kristen and Tara.
Thanks so much, Chair Zelli. Can you hear me okay? I was told earlier I sounded a bit crackly, so I just want to do a quick check if I sound okay.
I think you sound great.
Okay.
Coming loud and clear.
All right, great. So thank you, Chair Zelli and council members for having us here this afternoon to talk about the findings from the Affordable Housing Production Survey and how it informs really two key issues that we're going to focus on today. Joel just described, the residential portion of our annual building permit survey. This data set that we're going to talk to you now about is constructed by using those numbers as a base, but then we follow up with a different survey to local governments, and we ask specifically about the price points of those new housing units and the fiscal tools and incentives and other policies that jurisdictions are using to support affordable housing. When we can't get that survey data, response rate issues or other factors, we manually research each and every property to assign an affordability level to each unit. This could be the asking rent online. It could be a sales price for a new single family home. So a lot of work goes into creating this data set for the 7-county region. I just want to acknowledge really quickly the efforts of those many hands that make the work happen. Joel Nihus, who you just heard from, Maya Guerrero Combs in our Livable Communities section, Hillary Lovelace, also in LCA, and Elias Anthon in Information Services. So it takes a team to make a data set. Next slide, please. Before we really get started here, we want to do what I labeled this slide the affordability metrics reality check. Housing affordability, of course, includes two moving parts: household income and housing costs. We express housing affordability in terms of area median income, or AMI, a measure calculated by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for the 16-county metropolitan statistical area, so larger than our region. On the slide is the AMIs for 2020 and the various levels that we'll talk about throughout today's presentation. The council considers housing affordable if households with incomes at or below that 60% AMI level can afford the unit without spending more than 30% of their incomes on housing costs, including utilities. Click once, please, Greg. So that's the income side. Looking at the housing cost side, we have some examples here for you. Just to add a little bit more data to this, I wanted to share that according to our Metro Rent Trends dashboard, which models rents based on commercial data sets for multifamily properties in the region, Zillow and CoStar, maybe two names you're familiar with. We use those data sources in this model. The median asking price for a 2-bedroom apartment in the Twin Cities region, just at the end of Q2, July 2021, was $1,500 per month, and a 1-bedroom is at $1,180 per month. Okay, so that's just some regional figures for you. According to the Minneapolis area realtors data from July 2021, the median sales price for a newly constructed single-family home is at $450,000. And that drops somewhat for existing homes at $343,000. but obviously still well above the number that you see here representing what's affordable to a household at 80% AMI. Click once, please, Greg. And just to add just some additional regional context, looking across the region's jurisdictions, 21 jurisdictions have a citywide median household income at or below that 62,000 amount that signifies a 60% AMI. Places like New Hope, Brooklyn Center, Osseo, St. Paul, West St. Paul, Hopkins, Little Canada. So in these cities, affordable housing is about like the average household could afford. I just thought that was interesting and worth mentioning. It is also true that we have households with incomes at 30% AMI in every jurisdiction in the region. And the vast majority, no matter where they live, are experiencing cost burden, and typically severe cost burden. So I bring this forward, I want to start the presentation with this, just, that how we discuss affordability, how we define it, to make sure that we are all on the same page in terms of this presentation today, but also to really lift up that what we refer to as affordable housing remains out of reach for many households. Our AMI threshold of 60% was carefully considered and designed to align with federal and state funding and programs. But I just want to acknowledge that how this conversation and these metrics can just differ from those on the ground realities. And I think just acknowledging that is important. And it's just, let's keep this in mind as we move through today's numbers. Next slide, please, Greg. Maybe along the same lines, Tara and I are here today to really talk about this fresh data that we have on affordable housing production, which is just a piece of this much broader conversation concerning housing affordability. We don't come to you today with solid data on those losses of affordable units, especially the losses that may take place in the naturally occurring affordable housing market, that are unsubsidized, and their prices may just put them out of reach for what we would consider affordable. We and other regional data partners are always thinking about how we can get there on the tracking side, not just look at snapshots, but try to figure out how we can do actual trends with this. But we don't have any information on that today. Thinking more about the policy side, there's a lot to unpack with regard to the housing affordability conversation. The intersection of various housing choice that are rooted in spatial patterns of existing or where new affordable housing is built, how COVID has impacted housing, and the underlying housing instability and homelessness issues that predate COVID. So it's a huge conversation, that. But we just don't have the time today to unpack a lot of these points. But we are going to dive into two key issues that really relate to this affordable housing production data, and to really focus our conversation today on the policy choices and action that the council can take. I'll just add that we would be happy to return, possibly with partners, to unpack some of these areas for you at a later date if that's of interest. On to the data. Next slide, please, Greg. So this chart shows the latest trend data for both market rate and affordable housing production in the Twin Cities region. You could click twice, please, Greg. Just want to call out kind of two key changes that kind of disrupt this time series a little bit. This chart goes back to 2000, but the dashed line here in the center just calls attention to a change in how we defined affordable units that happened in 2011. Prior to 2011, we looked at owner-occupied housing at 80% AMI as affordable. We looked at renter-occupied units at 50% AMI and below as affordable. And then starting in 2011, we started looking at that 60% level for all housing units going forward. So that's why we're going to be referring to 2011 to 2020 today, not 2010. Just a small difference, but I thought I'd explain it. Also in 2014, with the adoption of the Housing Policy Plan, we started collecting the full range of affordability. So we started to get more information about those units at 30 and 50% AMI, recognizing that the depth of affordability really needs to be captured in part of this conversation. So I personally just hit 8 years at Met Council last month, which means that this is my 7th year doing this analysis. which means that, and this total, this 24 total that you see for 2020, that is the highest total that we've seen, certainly in my time, but also as you can see since 2011. And I'm sure if we looked back even into those last couple of years before that change was made, we are also exceeding that total as well. That was about 1 in every 7 new housing units that were added. So you just saw those totals for 2020 that Joel presented. So this affordable total is about 1 in 7 of those new units. Looking back and adding up that blue line, starting with 2011 all the way to 2020, the region has added 16,423 new affordable units, about 11% of all the new housing added in the region. Next slide, please, Greg. Now, digging in a bit more deeply into where these new units were built, we've summarized the data between 2011 and 2020 by jurisdiction here on the map. We've listed the 10 cities that have produced the highest number of affordable units over this time period. You know, what's interesting about this list is that, you know, not every jurisdiction on it had like large gains in housing overall. If you think about, you know, that we showed a similar map in the last presentation, not a ton of overlap between the communities listed here and the communities listed on that previous map for overall housing production. You know, take, for example, Minneapolis. Obviously, Minneapolis added a lot of affordable units. In fact, they added 29% of the region-wide total of affordable units since 2011. But this total that you see here, this 4,851 units, this is 16% of the new housing added in Minneapolis overall. Bloomington and Eagan, you know, smaller number of affordable units, but similar shares at that 16 and 12% respectively. So this is the share of their new housing that was affordable. Contrast that with New Brighton, West St. Paul, and Columbia Heights, also on this list. They added an almost equal number of affordable units and market rate units over this time period. So just some background on these totals and how they differ among these top producing jurisdictions. So, you know, overall, thinking about just even the last two slides, you know, largely good news. The number of affordable units is trending upward, and that is what we want to see. We have jurisdictions across the region adding new affordable units, also something we want to see. However, looking back over the 2011 to 2020 period, we fell short of building the new affordable housing we needed. And I don't mean by a little bit. Based on the actual growth in households over this period, the region needed to add about 44,570 new affordable units. And as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, we built, you know, over 16,400. I'm going to turn it over to Tara to talk about the nuances within this shortfall as like our first key issue that we'll talk about today.
Thanks, Kristen. Just checking that everyone can hear me. Awesome. Okay. So the first of the nuances that Kristen mentioned we'd be bringing up is how affordable housing production relates to what the demand or need is. And she talked about that looking back. Every decade, we establish forecasts for the purposes of local comprehensive planning and our own metropolitan development guide. The share of that forecasted growth representing households earning less than 80% of area median income is then allocated across the region so cities can guide land to support that need as the Metropolitan Land Planning Act requires. Now that we have the 2020 affordable housing production data, we can look back at the 2011 to 2020 planning decade and compare affordable housing production against need. The data you see in this chart reflects the share of household growth anticipated at 80% AMI or less that was forecasted, but adjusted to the share of actual overall growth of the decade, the number Kristen just mentioned, around 44,000, and not the forecasted growth anticipated. That total built was just over 16,000 again, as she just mentioned. But what you can see on this table is that the urban center and urban community designations collectively produce the most affordable housing relative to their need. And even though they still fell far short, other communities collectively did not manage to even produce a third of their need. Next slide, please.
I think you're one behind, Tara. That's okay. Maybe just give folks a few minutes to absorb what you just said in the
Yeah,
chat
thank you. I was
here.
looking at my notes and not the screen. I apologize for that. Just breaking down further Kristen's analysis of where affordable units got added and looking at urban center and urban communities as getting closest to meeting their share, and yet it's still being, barely half. I think you can go to the next slide now, Greg. Thanks. Here, kind of in map form, we're seeing that the darker shades of teal represents communities that got closest to meeting their 2011 to 2020 affordable housing need. Despite the not so great news that few cities were able to meet it, one of the positive things I take from this map is the fact that where the need was met or close to met is represented by all types of communities, from rural centers to urban centers and everything in between. So we know that affordable housing can be built in any type of community, large or small, affluent or lower income. Next slide, please. Looking forward, and we're always striving to continuously improve our efficacy and our understanding of what our role and capacity at the council is to address affordable housing needs. We know that housing is a complex issue and there are many different ways we can focus our efforts, but the nuance of what level of affordability new housing is being produced at really matters. This issue is not only a key objective in the council's strategic plan, it's arguably the most persistently difficult housing challenge in our region, and it directly influences many of the other housing topics that are also frequently discussed, including many of the things on the slide Kristen shared that we weren't explicitly going to talk about today. The supply-demand mismatch we have in the deeply affordable housing market, or housing affordable to a household earning 30% AMI or less, is a key issue. The change we made back in 2014 to allocate future need by level of affordability was, in my opinion, one of the most impactful changes we made for the 2040 planning cycle. The purpose was to acknowledge the different challenges and tools for building new affordable housing. Sorry about that, got a reminder. At different affordability levels. So we wanted to differentiate that building a new unit at 30% AMI is harder than building a unit 60% AMI, but the impact has gone far beyond that. And it shows us just how much the need skews to the deeply affordable, the need does. More than one city has shared to me personally that breaking down need by level of affordability has dramatically changed their approach toward addressing housing needs, and with good reason. Not only are over 80% of our existing residents earning 30% AMI or less cost burdened, as Kristen pointed out earlier, but growth in the need for affordable housing at that level represents roughly the same number of the two other levels of affordable housing combined. Next slide, please. When we look back in more detail over the past 5 years of affordable housing production, we begin to see why the housing situation in the region does not seem to be improving, despite record amounts of funding made available and indications from most affordable housing funders that deeply affordable units are prioritized. When we look at the average annual production of housing affordable at 30% AMI or less over the last 5 years, and compare it to the annual need for additional deeply affordable housing over the coming decade, the stark difference between production and need by level of affordability is sobering. Considered again with the current economic instability of existing lowest income households, this data tells us how difficult it can be to build new housing that is deeply affordable, and why we are seeing so many predictable outcomes of housing unaffordability and instability. People sheltering on transit, growing encampments, an underemployed workforce despite a desperate need for workers, increased social service needs and costs, increased strain on healthcare systems, poor school performance, and unstably housed kids. And unacceptably, each of these outcomes affect Black, Indigenous, and other residents of color at greater rates than white residents. Next slide, please. All that is very sobering, but there are things we can do or are doing currently to address this serious issue. And that's what I want to share with you today, what I'm most excited to share with you today, what the council can do to address this lack of supply of deeply affordable housing. One of the things we can look at is our own funding source, primarily the local housing incentives account through the LCA programs, which is intended to support affordable housing production and preservation. And so we are working really hard to understand how we could position our LHIA funding to fund more units at 30% AMI. The Met Council, like the state, like a lot of other large funders of affordable housing have been prioritizing 30% AMI units for quite a few years now, but we are not seeing increases in production that are commensurate with that. And so we need to unpack that. We need to know more. We need to understand if the issue has to do with prioritizing 30% AMI units, but also prioritizing so many other things we are trying to achieve that ultimately other projects at higher affordability levels are able to rise above in those selections. Or is there something about the applications coming in for 30% AMI units that are not as feasible, or having a harder time being proven as feasible to fund? So we need to understand the minutia really to be able to decide how we could position our small share of that affordable housing funding market to address this really important need. I think part of that involves a really difficult conversation amongst all funders of affordable housing, that if we were to truly prioritize 30% AMI units, there's a very large chance you would see that production of affordable housing number go down, because the depth of subsidy needed to create that deeply affordable unit simply is so much greater. And I think that that is something that, again, we need to dig in to understand deeply the impact of that. One of the interesting kind of research questions we've been asking ourselves is, there's a lot of talk about filtering down, but we know that when older market rate units start to maybe become affordable in that 60 to 80% AMI level, which does happen to some extent, that can increase supply in that area, but that's already the area getting the most new construction for affordable housing as well. What we don't talk much about is that when 80% of our households earning 30% AMI are housing cost burdened, if those units affordable to them became available, that would free up a unit that's probably affordable at 50, 60, 80% AMI, that a household earning 30% AMI has found some excruciating way to make work. So I think there's a lot of unpacking to do about the impact of funding a 30% AMI unit and it not being apples to apples to funding a 60% AMI unit, and using that information to better guide our comfort with perhaps funding fewer units that are more deeply affordable. Another thing we need to dig in deeply is to understand how we get more applications for 30% AMI units. We really, as again, a funding region, not just the Met Council, receive a lot of applications for 30% AMI units that don't get funded. But also, we still see a lot of applications that don't include any 30% AMI units at all. So one of the things I've heard that needs further, investigation is that there aren't always the capacity for the wraparound services that are often paired with applications for 30% AMI units. So to the extent that we can subsidize the construction of the unit or the rent of the resident, if the capacity of our social service agencies and other support services are not there, that can also inhibit, development. I want to also mention that we are also partnering closely with the HRA and work to align our efforts, which are so obviously interwoven here. We know that, you have heard that project-based vouchers are a very desirable source of funding available to units at 30% AMI. We also know that the need is so great, even if every HRA and PHA in the region maxed out their capacity to issue project-based vouchers, we wouldn't even meet 1 year's worth of need. So we have to look beyond that, and we have to figure out how we can, outside of the project-based voucher program, which is also competing with another important housing need, is no longer the go-to policy or go-to source of choice for developers for housing at affordable at 30% AMI, because it's just not tenable. I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Kristen now. I know that was a lot, to share some information about our second key issue, which is equally important, and that's homeownership.
Thanks, Tara. Next slide, please, Greg. So we want to break down, just as Joel did in his presentation about residential development, we also have housing types here, but by levels of affordability. The vast majority of new affordable housing, 92% since 2011, is multifamily, which I don't think comes as a surprise. But as Tara just explored, and as this chart on the left shows, it's the largest share of that affordable multifamily are at those higher levels of AMI at 60 and 50%. And that 30% trend line you can see down there in gold at the bottom. On the far right-hand side, we have townhomes by price point. As you heard from Joel earlier, that townhome production in the region is pretty low. So affordable townhome production is also low. We've added about 500 affordable townhomes since 2011. And again, the majority of those are at that 60% price point, 50 and 60% AMI. And that leaves single family homes shown here in the middle. We heard earlier that new construction of single family homes is trending upward, slow but steady. We're starting to see numbers we haven't seen in quite a while. But the vast majority of new single family homes are, of course, priced out of reach to households, even at 80% AMI, even at 115% of AMI, which you see there. The other categories of AMI are so low, you can't really see them on the chart, but they're there. We did not break 100 homes under 60% AMI in the past 5 years. And in 2020, we added 49 across the region, which was actually up from 30 in 2019. Next slide, please, Greg. Oh, actually, one more, please. Thank you. That brings us to this slide, which has our homeownership rates in the Twin Cities region by race and ethnicity. I believe you're all quite familiar with these stats by now, but it is worth reiterating that the Twin Cities has, and for many decades now, one of, if not the highest disparity in homeownership by race and ethnicity. Homeownership is a wealth builder, and the inequities in homeownership by race and ethnicity are an outcome of the systemic racism that is well documented in employment, in lending, in appraisals, and it's also part of intergenerational poverty and its enduring impacts. So Tara's going to close us out by talking about what the council is doing in this area, which we know is a priority for you council members.
Thanks, Kristen. Next slide, please, Greg. So what can we do? I know at least the members of the Community Development Committee are familiar with this, but for other council members, know that we will be proposing a pilot program of the LHIA funding account for 2022 that would allow us to seek and award funding for homeownership applications that are laser focused on expanding that choice for homeownership opportunities in parts of the region that are primarily single family and yet cost, home sales are much higher than the regional average, and more specifically address households of color, Black, Indigenous, and other households of color. And so we are working on a pilot that is a really accessible application that folks that maybe feel like the scale of the super RFP, which is normally where they would go for single family affordable housing funding from LHIA, can apply in a simpler way for some very focused, targeted approaches to homeownership that get at geographic choice and at ensuring our funding, while not sufficient to dramatically change the regional numbers in homeownership across race and ethnicity, we can at least be accountable to the dollars we put out the door and the individual households we serve with our money. Another thing that we can do is use disaggregated data to better target affordable homeownership investments, and that will be woven into the pilot, but it's also really helpful information to share with our partners. For example, if we are working to increase homeownership opportunities in an area where there are a lot of households that have religious beliefs that don't allow financing that includes interest, that's something that's really important to think about and target. There may be other special needs of a specific population around large families or multi-generational families, and we can use this great new data set we have to be so much more specific and tailored in our partnership with cities about how to address homeownership needs. Speaking of local governments, we can continue to provide technical assistance to them to support affordable homeownership. This is a generalization. It's certainly not true everywhere, but most cities tend to spend their housing efforts and funding sources toward multifamily, and that may be very important and intentional. But I've been really interested in working with local governments to understand more about what they can do to support affordable homeownership, even if it isn't a direct contribution financially. Often just knowing kind of who the players are and how to connect to people can make a big difference. And then again, there's a great opportunity in this topic to partner with the HRA in ways to create homeownership opportunities for the folks that they serve, or possibly considering the homes that we own through the Family Affordable Housing Program. So that's what we're working on currently with addressing homeownership. I covered in a few slides ago what we're working on currently to address this dire need for more deeply affordable housing. As we mentioned, we're working on a lot of other things as well, and those all iterate with these two big key issues. But we are trying to focus and really be intentional about where we guide our efforts and what we are doing to try to resolve the issues that are in your strategic plan. I just want to say one more thing and then I'll wrap up that Ashley Johnson and I, the LHI program officer, will be presenting more information about the LHI homeownership pilot at CDC on Monday. So I encourage those of you not on the Community Development Committee who are interested in learning more about that pilot to tune in on Monday. And with that, next slide, Greg. Kristen and I thank you for hanging on through the end of this presentation and of course, welcome any questions.
Thank you both. This is really rich material, and Tara knows I'm really interested in learning that this the need at this at the 30% levels really what we're facing. Can we open it up? Any questions, thoughts from any of the council members?
Mr. Chair, this is Councilmember Wolf.
Yeah, go ahead, and then Judy. Go ahead,
Thanks.
Wendy.
I had my raise hand thing up, but I don't know if you
Oh,
can see
yeah.
all of us.
Sometimes I see it, sometimes I don't. Yeah.
So I'm interested in learning more about sort of the demographics of the below 30% AMI. Why are people in that position? Because I mean, if you're retired and you have, you know, $1 million in assets and a Social Security check, you could fall in that group because it looks at your annual income rather than your total assets. But also, what sorts of needs are there? Is it disability or other issues that keep people from being able to earn enough money? That would give us a better idea of what types of housing and what the real problems and issues are.
I would love to create a fact sheet for you on that, Councilmember Wolf, and council members. I'd be happy to pull that together and share that with you.
That'd be
And
great.
Sarah may have some answers on it now, but I'm just saying, well, we could create a much more thorough document so that we're really clear about who that serves.
Mr. Chair,
Judy.
Councilmember Wolf, I'll just add that is a great thought. And as we talk about how much we need to understand in the weeds, that's a great component to understand. I think the answer will be all of the above, but in what shares is really important.
Judy, did you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to thank the team for putting all of this together. It's so informative. I mean, a lot of this we know, but I think it's important as we go out to the public so that they can see the facts and the figures and how we're trending. I really appreciate that, Councilmember Wolf. Didn't even know we could dig into that kind of data and that would be very illuminating. So yeah, getting that maybe as a companion rider to this presentation going forward, and certainly to the housing work group and CDA would be cool. And then just last but not least, and I know we are not, first of all, I love the slide where it says things we aren't talking about tonight. That's very helpful. Thank you. And so while we talk about, again, the shortage in production in both market rate and affordability, again, just highlighting a point that was made, we can't really track what we're losing in the naturally occurring affordable housing market, right? It just is happening. And that one's a really hard one. So while it looks like these are numbers in production, but in reality, the net is much lower. Some number. I really do appreciate the focus on 30% AMI, and I really appreciate the comments, Tara, on how unintended consequences might pop up because of that. The subsidies are much greater, and it's so complex right now. And the last thing I want to say, and at some point, we will keep working on the housing puzzle and trying to solve for affordability, but it is about wages. And there's, a bigger picture here. If people can't earn, I understand that the cost of doing business is very important and there needs to be a bottom line, and small businesses drive the economic engine of this country. And so wages and adjustment in wages can be detrimental to them, especially going through a pandemic. But, I'm just going to say it, to say $15 is something you can live on an hour is just that's kind of the new discussion. Oh, we're at $15 an hour now. Well, what can that, if you're the sole income earner, or even if you have two breadwinners at 15 an hour, you're still not making enough. And then the competition for those units is fierce. So we are, I think, at a really critical moment in time. I can't imagine 10 years from now what the trends will look like, and they'll look back at what we were doing here to try to change that. But it is so massively comprehensive. There will be no one size fits all solution. And I appreciate that our staff and this council don't believe in that either, right? So I just want to commend the staff for this. The news isn't great. Um, there's a generational situation happening where the generations behind us are thinking, well, we're not probably going to be doing better than our folks did. And that worries me greatly. So just a hats off to everybody for putting this together. And I appreciate being able to be part of the committees that are working on this.
Thanks, Judy. Well said. And I know we're going to go a little bit over, so I know some of you have to leave, but let's just keep going because this is such great and important material for us to cover. And Robert, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. And to really add my thanks to Tara, her team, the incredible data that they're generating for us is really opening up a great debate, some potential solutions. It's just, it's really thrilling. And so I'm so grateful to all the heavy duty staff work. And I'm really building off of kind of what I have two things I want to bring up. And the first builds off what Councilmember Johnson just talked about. Councilmember Wolf was moving into the territory as well. And that's the revenue side, right? The income side of affordable housing. And so, Judy talks about $15 an hour. That's 30%. It's actually a little less than 30% of the MMI. So that's the demographic that we're talking about. I think it's 1590 or something like that as the hourly rate for $31,000 a year. So I want us to be talking about that in the specific sector of housing and housing production and retention I want to talk about are the 2 to 4 unit dwellings. And we heard in our first report that those are lagging, permits for those are lagging. In the city of Minneapolis through about 1980 to 2000, that was the sector of housing that was demolished at the greatest rate by far, and it was often security related and safety related issues. These were poorly managed properties held by slumlords, and so communities would support this as well, where they just wanted the houses to come down because they were so negatively impacting the community. And I'll note that the 2 to 4 unit sector of housing is an incredible income potential for a family. And so we talk about home ownership, and the types of housing that we showed in affordable production, 2 to 4 units was not even included. That's not even in our thinking. It was townhouses, multi-units, and single family. And so there's this sector of housing that was a rung of the economic ladder, at least in the core cities, that was deliberately kicked out from under people. My parents, my grandparents, they lived in the core cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul in small multi-unit housing. Many generations lived in one side of the duplex, and they kept a room for boarders, and then they were able to rent out and generate income out of the other unit. And then my parents as children were able to see their parents managing this asset and amassing wealth. And so that's a sector of the housing development that we don't even talk about. And it's something that we could actually do that could be addressing the income inequalities as well. So to put that marker out there, the other is, and I'm so glad Judy and Wendy went in this direction, and that's really about wages, or I guess I more broadly say, to me, it's about what the employer's responsibility is. And so as we look at 30%, 50%, 80%, 60%, what we are really talking about is subsidizing workforce housing for primarily private employers. And so what is the role? And we can, advocates, developers come to the public sector because we have this transparency and these tools, and we feel this responsibility to be serving our constituents. And I just wonder, as we're developing programs, innovating programs with the resources we have under our control, how we want to engage the employers in this conversation and what their contribution might be as well, because we are housing, we are not, we're not succeeding at housing their workers. And so I'm really looking forward. I'm fortunate enough, I get a lot of bites at this apple through the Met Council, through the committees, through the Housing Policy Work Group. But I just wanted to, and so most of those other members of the Housing Policy Work Group have heard me gas on about this before, but just to put it out there in front of other council members as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair of the Community Development Committee. You can gas on as much as you like. This is really great stuff. Thank you.
Watch it. I just might.
Riva, do you have a comment? Oh, you may be on mute.
Yeah, some great ideas in terms of how we can include household wages in the picture of affordability. Getting employers involved with something that is very innovative. So I'm glad to be working on the housing work group, which is going to be analyzing the criteria for this new home ownership pilot, and looking forward to the discussion at the community development meeting. Looking at cities where you know, we may be able to target incentives for municipalities that might be interested in a program such as this pilot. Much more to come on what impacts Metropolitan Council can have on closing the affordable home ownership gap.
I love that list of what can we do. That's the one to focus on. Right. I'm very respectful for everybody's evening, but anybody with the last comment, thought? All right, Kristen and Tara, thank you so much. And I'll just echo what everybody else has said. We have amazing staff, and we have such a great opportunity to bend some curves and to look at those trends and focus on the areas that I love that what you're describing here. It's time to trickle up, not trickle down, and we can figure that out. So thanks. What a robust committee of the whole we've had this evening. Quite a lot of information to think about, and we're going to continue these conversations in our committees and our council meetings and at our committee of the whole. So if there's no other thoughts or comments for the day, I think we're ready to adjourn, but enjoy the night, and I'm looking forward to having this conversation again. Thank you so much for presenting.
Thank you, everyone. Good night.